Welcome to our fireside chat. It's so nice to literally be in front of the fire. We are gathered here and happy to have people from quite literally around the world. We were just looking at the list of all the people who we're reaching out to, and such a pleasure to be with you this evening. Professor Jones, I think, I hate to admit it, but we go back more than a few decades in our friendship. And,
at this point, yeah.
And our Nate's and my admiration, for sure. I'm Laurel Alder, and joined by my husband Nate. I'm the president of the Alumni Association, and this is really a lovely Alumni Association evening, and we are honored to be here with you. You are a legendary professor and a favorite professor, and we're going to talk about some fun stuff. We're joking about the fact that we are here unmasked this evening because we're all vaccinated to talk about the plague. We have been overwhelmed by the number of people who are here joining us, and so welcome to our fireside. We're here at the stadium, and just so happy to be with you. Just a couple of housekeeping kinds of things. We will have some time for questions at the end of this, and so if you have any questions, use the Q&A feature on the bottom of the screen. So if you are new to Zoom, you can just scroll down to the bottom, and there is a Q&A or a chat, and you can send us a question, and we will make sure that we try and do our best to get this to get to your questions. We'd like to thank our sponsors this evening, the USU Emeriti and Retired Employees Association, for supporting the USU Alumni Association, and we are glad that so many people from that group are also joining us this evening.
So for those of you who may not be familiar with Dr. Jones, I will make a quick introduction. So Professor Norm Jones joined the history department in 1978. And he was head of the department for 18 years. I'm going to say that again. 18 years.
That's why I have no hair.
Amazing. So, university administration at the finest. But we have a true scholar here. He has published 11 scholarly books, more than 50 scholarly articles on early modern English religion, law, culture, including the English Reformation, religion and culture adaptation. Dr. Jones has held fellowships at Oxford University, Cambridge University, Harvard University, and one of our favorites, the Huntington Library. He has chaired the Regent's General Education Task Force since 2001. You are a long hauler, aren't you? And he is the leader of a national effort to fine-tune the history curriculum nationwide. I am a former student of Dr. Jones, and I know his love for history and for teaching history in a way that resonates, and so truly a national treasure in the History Academy. He is a senior fellow of the Association of American Colleges and Universities, and he chairs the College Board's Advanced Placement Higher Education Advisory Committee. His teaching interests include the history of Western civilizations, early modern Europe, and one of the classes I took from you, the history of Christianity. I still have the book.
That's a good sign.
He holds a bachelor's in history from none other than Idaho State University, a master's in history from the University of Colorado, and a PhD in history from Cambridge University.
So this is really a fun thing for us to gather with professors who are beloved, and you certainly are one of those beloved, amazing professors who've just touched lives. And I think that all of the people who are joining us in our fireside chat tonight are testament to that. But there were a couple of people who shared some thoughts and remembrances when they signed up for this, and I just thought it would be fun to share those with you, because I thought you might like to hear a little bit of
my ego needs it.
Your ego needs stroking. So one of these, I never studied harder for any class, and in the end I received an A. Knowing that I earned that grade helped me realize that academically I could do hard things. And I love this. I found Dr. Jones to be intelligent, approachable, thoughtful, and student-oriented. So I think that's a beautiful tribute. And then the other one that I wanted to share with you, I think speaks to really a truly fine professor, which is, he was department head at the time, but he wasn't too busy for directed readings. Through Augustine's Confessions and City of God, he let me assist in the History of Christianity class, the one that you're mentioning, and yes, we have hauled that book around from house to house to house. This opportunity allowed me to repeat all that material and go deeper as a class mentor. Dr. Jones's love of God, education, and his students were always evident and enriched all of these qualities in me. And he goes on to say how that's influenced his whole life. And what a gift to be a professor who can do that kind of thing. So we now get to turn the time to you and kick off some ideas.
Yeah.
Big, tough first question, Dr. Jones. Let's start where it all began. How in the world did a kid from southern Idaho find his way to, of all places, Logan, Utah? And don't tell me you're just another guy from southern Idaho that got you to come here.
Well, I'm good with a combine and a siphon tube.
Welcome to Cache Valley with all those farm skills.
Yeah, right. That's what you need. That's why you understand Aggies. You have to be one to understand one sometimes. Well, I came here. I did my PhD, and of course, when you do a PhD, you can't expect to have a job anywhere close to where you're from. Just, it can't be done. And I actually had finished my doctorate and was home working on the family farm, and Ross Peterson called me.
Not another southern Idaho boy.
Not another Idahoan, that's right. It's part of the Idaho Mafia. And Ross said that they had a job going, so I should apply. So I applied, and of course you think, well, I must have an inside track. Actually, I didn't. So they didn't choose me as a finalist. They brought in other candidates, and none of them were interesting. Apparently, one of them looked so much like someone in the political science department that they couldn't stand, that the thought of hiring this poor person, just they couldn't have it. So what were they to do?
You got the job by default?
Well, they called me. I drove down from Idaho, had my interview, and they offered me the job on the spot. Good. So Ross Peterson hired me, and if talk about lineages, if walking in Ross's footsteps, because I know this audience knows Ross as well. So that's how I ended up here. And my mentor at Cambridge said that's a good first job.
Oh, bless.
I know it's been 43 years I've been here.
Yeah. What's next after this?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm still waiting for the second job.
Well, we're glad that you found your second job here in Logan.
So this is a nice light fireside type of topic. Should we talk plague?
I think that's why we're here, and probably why all these people are signed up. They have a morbid necessity to talk plague.
Well, let's start there.
All right.
You've been studying this, and I think you've got some really interesting things to share.
Well, I have been studying this for some odd reason. Studying the plague lately has been kind of the thing to do.
Not since March 15th. You predate the March 15th, 2020.
There are a lot of people in this audience who remember that in History 104 we did talk about the plague. So, yeah, it's a standard in the syllabus, right? You have to talk about the plague.
And if you don't remember it, you'd better brush up, right?
Yeah, that's right. So
there's going to be a quiz on the plague in History 104.
That's
30
right.
years ago.
30 years ago. I bet there are people in this audience that remember, though. Having looked at the list, I can see a lot of young faces popping up in my memory.
So here we are, 2021, 2020, last year. You've been talking about the plague for decades.
Been talking about it for decades, but because of current circumstances, I decided I'd do something more. So I've been writing a research piece on plague management in Elizabethan England. So the second half of the 16th century. Because, when society is thrown a curveball, one of the things that happens is the historians are called upon to create the perspective we need about what's happening to us. And so we historians have a responsibility to respond to that public demand, so we can have a conversation about how societies respond to these crises. And so that's what I did. I started in working on the guy I work on all the time, Sir William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, who was Queen Elizabeth's right-hand manager most of her reign. And in 1563, he was only 40 years old. The worst outbreak of the Black Death hits Britain of the 16th century. So they were thrown into the deep end. They hadn't seen a major outbreak like this for a very long time, and so they had to figure out how to do it. And so that's what I've been researching, is this question of how do you do it. So first, before we get into how they did it, I think I better give you some definitions, because the Black Death is not a scientific way of talking. We were talking about the disease Yersinia pestis. Yersinia is the name of the guy who actually discovered it. It's a bacteria, so it's a bacterial infection. It comes in 3 flavors. The Black Death part is because in one version of the disease it attacks the lymph nodes, which swell up.
Mostly here?
Well, here, I
Okay.
mean, all the places there are lymph nodes, you get these swellings. And then you begin to hemorrhage. So the blood is loose in your body, and your toes and,
And
your
you
fingers
start
turn
turning
black, your
black.
nose turns black. And then there's about a 50% chance is the next step is you die.
Yeah, and let's just, put it in context. Hospitalization in 1653, come on.
Yeah.
I
No.
mean, we're talking, what kind of leeches, I mean.
Well, actually, you could call in a doctor, and they had all sorts of cures, except that they didn't actually cure you.
Yeah.
But if you're lucky, the swellings burst, which apparently is horribly painful. But if the swellings burst, you have some chance that you'll survive, and so you could become immune to the plague by having it. So that's one of the ways we talk about herd immunity now. Well, this is how you got herd immunity. So that's one version. The other 2 versions are less common. There's a pneumonic version, which is spread through the air, and so in that case a mask would help. And there is a septicemic version that attacks the bloodstream. So if you get the black one, 50% chance of being dead. If you get the other 2, it's 100% chance before modern medicine.
What did the people in 1653 know at this point in time? I mean, what you just explained in the last 2
Well-
minutes, they didn't even know all of that.
Oh, they didn't know any of that.
They had to learn this.
They recognized the swellings. They called it God's mark. So where does the disease come from? That, of course, is a key question. The obvious explanation is the disease is caused by God.
Obviously.
Yeah, that's the number one go-to, because, of course, God is in control of all creation. So God occasionally becomes really ticked.
This is part of the history of Christianity.
That's right. And God sends a message. And the message comes on kind of 2 levels. You are really a bad person.
Why are you pointing at me?
Well, you're closest. She abets you, but we know.
I think she was pointing at me as well.
Well, actually, since this is the 16th century, it's you because you're the man.
Yes. Yes.
Anything that she does is your fault. So,
Yes.
but that's God is warning people to repent.
Yeah.
And when he sends a pandemic, he's warning the society to repent. And so that usually means the king or the queen had better do something. So that's the first explanation for where the disease comes from.
So Queen Elizabeth does what?
Well, we're going to get to that. So let's call the doctors first. So there are professional doctors. The medical faculties at Oxford and Cambridge have a well-developed understanding of what causes these things. And it is caused by bad air.
Bad air.
This is where we get the word malaria. So it is malaria, bad air.
Mark Damon needs to be watching this, right?
Mark Damon's lecture on this is even better than mine. So bad air. So but this is a good diagnosis. The problem is you can't deal with bad air in mass because every person is different. So you have to rebalance the humors. So the best advice when the plague comes is flee soon, fly far, stay long. So get away from the infected people.
Do you see this in the primary documents? The
Oh, yeah.
Flee soon, fly far.
Stay long.
Stay long. The Bishop of London quotes this in Latin in 1563.
Where are these documents that you're finding these?
Well, this particular one, I think, is in the Lansdowne manuscripts in the British Library.
Wow.
So don't quote me on that footnote.
This is why we research.
That's right. But we know that bad air can cause this disease. And so if you can't leave town, the next best thing is like seal up your house so that no breezes come from the smelly side. Strew fresh herbs on the floor. Wear a mask that contains herbs. You all know that the famous plague mask. The reason it's got that long proboscis is it's full of rosemary and thyme and other good-smelling things, because by filtering the bad air through good-smelling stuff, it protects you.
The plague mask. I mean,
It is the plague
that
mask,
is the
yeah.
plague mask. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
That's right. And so, doctors would wear these things because then they could be close to their patients without getting the
Have
disease.
historians been able to figure out how far back masks go? I mean, is this the beginning of masks, or is
Oh, no, clear back,
Okay.
way back. Yeah, I mean, a
The
lot of
bad air,
these,
the malaria.
the malaria, because where are they getting this? They're getting it from Galen,
Yeah.
who's a Roman doctor, but where did he get it? He got it from the Greeks. And this is so this is a standard explanation. Your humors are out of balance. You should eat nothing but chicken, drink only white wine, seal up the south side of your house, and stop up the bad smells if you can't go to your country place.
The lords and the ladies.
Yeah. So the doctors, this is the advice they could give you. And they had, if you're really poor, you can still smell this stuff. If we were here, we'd smell sagebrush to prevent the disease. So then the cause that we know is that it's a disease that's bloodborne. A flea bites a rat because it's a disease of the rodent population. The flea bites the rat, sucks in the blood, bites the person, leaves a little blood in the wound, the person gets the disease. The same thing works with lice. And so when we see a big outbreak of this, what we know is that these people are living with a lot of fleas and lice. So
Humbling, truly humbling.
yeah, so they're very dirty, which is why if a person died of the plague, they would burn their clothes, their bedding, everything. Not that they understood about the fleas and the lice, but they knew there was something to do with the... So we've got two explanations. It's God, repent, and they wrote all sorts of prayers, and they spent a lot of time on their knees fasting and praying. And then there is the clean up the air thing. In the middle, of course, there's what do we do with the infected people? So we've got to cut off the infected people. And so in all episodes of the plague, clear back to the 14th century, we quarantine. Quarantine is an Italian word for the 40 days that a ship had to stay in port before they let the crew off if they had the disease on board.
Wow.
So quarantine, but their idea of quarantine is that when a person in a house got the disease, they would close it up.
Close the whole house.
Close the house up and with the people inside so that
Those people.
they couldn't get out to spread the disease.
But those people within the house got...
Well, the people in the house
Sick.
they might get the plague, they might starve, and
no one came to the house.
they might run out of fuel. Where do you get your wood? So
That's a real management problem. No services for the house.
no services. You're cold, you're freezing, and you're sick. Now, good Christians were encouraged to give charity to these people and leave fuel and food at the door, and people did. But it's a pretty haphazard sort of a thing. So whenever, they found a house of the plague, they put up the cross on the door with a slogan of "God have mercy." And everybody knew to stay away from there, and if the people tried to get out, then the watch could arrest them and pillory them and even hang them, although I'm not sure that, you've got the plague already, getting hung is probably not a terrible threat. But so you've got to control the movement of the population. They knew from observation that groups of people spread the disease. So one of the first things they will do is they will start closing down the places where people congregate, especially sinful people. So their first target are the theaters.
The theaters. I thought you were going to say taverns.
This is the age of Shakespeare, right?
Exactly.
So the taverns are problematic because this is where most people get their food.
I was going to say community centers, yeah.
Community centers. But I mean, they understood that if you crammed a lot of people in a room, a lot of them were going to get the plague.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, is a rough and ready just understanding. So when the plague came in 1563, the first thing they did is they warned people that it was coming because they knew it was coming. The army was in France. The army got the plague, had to be evacuated. The French defeated them. The French said, "You go home." And they went home and they spread the plague. So the royal government issued a thing saying basically the soldiers are coming, the plague is coming. Soldiers, you shouldn't get too close to other people.
Well, the soldiers' conditions in France must have been terrible.
Oh yeah.
They don't have houses.
Well, of course they were in a siege, and but the generals were saying we're losing more every day to the disease than we are to the enemy.
And the English are sending more over.
Yeah. So they're just circulating the population. So what the disease comes first. It's only among the poor, and nobody seems too worried about that. William Cecil writes a letter, and he said, there are a few cases in this neighborhood in London which is very poor, but nobody's worried about that because it's caused by the bad food they have to eat because they're so poor.
So the rest of us are fine.
The rest of us are fine. All we have to do is stay with the good food because this is humors, right? We're going to keep things balanced, and the poor can't. But the death rate starts to rise. So it spreads, and
Community spread.
Every parish keeps records, and so they know how many have died every week, and how many have died of the plague.
Does this get filtered up?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because everybody's watching this because they're really mapping the spread. They're doing what we would do. We do this every night. We check with Bear River Health or somebody to find out how many cases there have been.
Up, down, better.
Better,
Spikes
So
in Michigan.
It breaks out in July and it begins to climb. By September, there are several hundred a week dying.
Lord Burleigh is watching these.
Burleigh is watching, but he's got a problem. Not only have we got to keep the sick people away, we also have to protect everybody else. So we move the Queen away to Windsor, which is up the Thames.
Highly fortified.
Highly fortified. We're going to put the Queen up there, but everybody else comes to London and Westminster for governmental purposes, so they close the law courts. And you lawyers know how bad that is. If nobody can go to court.
That's a problem.
And all the people that support the people coming to court.
Chaos.
It's mass unemployment, among other things, and then nobody can process any legal thing.
Right.
So they they close the courts altogether.
First the theaters, then the courts.
First the theaters, then the courts of law. Yeah.
Different kind of theater.
They also decide they can't have parliament.
Oh yeah.
Because if you have parliament, again, it's people crammed in a room. So you've got the poor dying at a very high rate. You've got everybody else evacuated. You've got the economy in terrible shape. Their foreign business starts to suffer because the Dutch say, we don't want anything from you people because it might have the plague on it.
So they stop coming in.
Well, they close their ports to English goods.
There aren't any echoes in anything that you're saying with what we've been experiencing.
Nothing.
None at all.
Change the dates.
Nothing whatsoever, right. So
It's remarkable.
in the first phase of the plague, the first phase is panic.
Yeah.
We're not sure where it's coming from. We're really scared. We're going to do all sorts of things to just do something.
What is this?
What is this? And so we're in the panic phase. People are dying like flies. People are running away. They won't come back. Or if they try and come back, they're not allowed to come back. The gates are closed. The merchants won't bring anything to the city. So it's just, the suffering is compounding.
Yeah.
The plague is bad enough, but the suffering is compounding. And of course, the economic knock-on effect is huge.
Everybody's affected.
Everybody
Every
is.
last person.
Everybody is affected, yeah. And if you have to be there in the streets, you're living with this dread. Because remember, we're talking about mortality rates of 20-30% in this particular outbreak of the plague. The city is about 90,000 people. So 30,000 people are going to die in about 9 months.
So back to William Cecil and how he's managing this, because this is a management issue too.
It's totally a management issue, and he doesn't have many tools because the central government is not very strong. So he's constantly issuing orders to the Lord Mayor of London, or to the Mayor of Portsmouth, whoever.
Don't we love it? We have national and local government.
Yeah. And the local government really is highly fragmented, and so the Mayor of London doesn't control metropolitan London, just in the same way the Mayor of Logan can't control Hyde Park. So if the people of Hyde Park don't want to control their plague people, they all come to Logan to shop. So it doesn't matter what the Logan mayor did. So he's got jurisdictional problems. They're all fighting with each other about who's responsible, who's in charge. And finally, in early 1564, he issues the first kind of coherent set of plague orders. to the city of Westminster and to the Savoy, which is another place the Lord Mayor doesn't govern. So, and it's, keep people apart, appoint people to check on the dead. We want to know what they died of. We want to make sure that they're not buried secretly, because, you have people in the house dying of this, you bury them in the back garden because you don't want anybody to close up your house. So there's just, all these things you need to do. Cleanse the streets, and you need to get rid of all the casual labor, all the people that are looking for jobs, the people who aren't normally part of your household. No borders, close the hotels, issue a list of all the inns that have the disease so that nobody will stay there. So this is his first attempt at a set of standardized orders.
He doesn't have the CDC. He doesn't have
No.
the Institute of National Health, the
No.
National Health Service in England. I mean, like,
No, but he's got the Archbishop of Canterbury, and that helps, because the bishops are running the prayer chain.
Sure.
Because the other thing people were supposed to be doing is praying and fasting. The Archbishop of Canterbury took a look at what they'd planned and said, you can't get people to stay in church that long.
everybody wants their own organization to be addressed.
That's right. Yeah, so what he learns in the outbreak of 1563 is that no matter what the doctors say and what God does, you've got to have a plan. So we go from the panic stage to a stage of organizing. So he's thinking about, well, how could we make this system work?
It's like the reality is hit. We're here.
Mhm.
We've got this. We can't make it go away. We need to
That's right.
manage it into the future.
We cannot make the disease go away. That's beyond us. It's either God or the disease. So what we have to do is think about what is a realistic management system. And so that's what he begins to work on. And the plague keeps coming back. And so you've got multiple examples of this. It breaks out. If it happens in a college town like Oxford or Cambridge, they send all the students home.
Let's see. Did that happen this last
I don't know. I've never heard of such a thing as the students not staying for a plague.
Where are the kids in Palo Alto these days?
That's right. So you send them all home, and of course this also has the effect of a lot of them go home with the disease.
The disease.
Yep.
So it disperses
On an
the disease
airplane.
on an airplane. Yeah, these are all problems that we know well. One of his wards is on his way from Cambridge to his home, and the plague breaks out in his home, so he's sort of stranded on somebody's farm. He can't go forward and he can't go back. but you disperse to get away from the plague, but then the plague often follows you. People are writing saying, well, I stopped here and there was a dead man under the bench, and this is their intelligence network. Where is the plague? It's very hard to track. And they make rules like anybody who comes to court to see the Queen, who in modern parlance has a temperature, won't be allowed in. And if he's found to have the plague, they'll hang them. So they're beginning to say this is how this is going to work. And we can have the law courts come back, but we're going to control who can get in.
If I knew I was going to get hanged if I had the plague to go see the Queen, I just wouldn't go see the Queen.
Well, that's the whole point.
Yeah, like I'm just going to stay on that farm
Yeah.
for a couple of years.
Yeah, but they've got to control the movement of the population,
Yeah.
because that's the only tool they have. But they're in contact with the Italians, and the Italians are much more sophisticated about how to deal with plague. And so the Italians, one of the things that they do is
Well, the Italians have been through this with Florence
they
and Venice.
yeah, they know it well. But they also have the best medical people of the 16th century. The University of Padua is the medical school. And so they're taking this social isolation thing to the next step. So they're having general quarantine, and a general quarantine is when you just tell everybody to stay home.
Blanket.
Yeah.
In fact, I think they did that recently.
Yeah, we've done that
Not
recently.
once.
We've tried this several times to
The
get everybody
Italians.
to stay home. This is the Italians in the 16th century.
Yeah.
The first time they do it full blown, and it really works, is in Florence in 1631.
Okay.
Where everybody had to stay home, and they organized the food deliveries, and the priest would say mass on the street corner, so nobody had to come out of their house to worship, and it cut the death rate quite significantly in Florence.
Did the British know what was happening 22 years earlier in Florence?
Well, they knew that the Milanese had been experimenting with something like the general quarantine, but they couldn't do it. The Italians also had two things that the English never had. they had an operation called the Sanita, the health service. And the Sanita built hospitals. So if you got sick, rather than lock you in your house, they took you to a plague hospital called the Lazaretto, and they would take care of you there, and then they could give you a certificate saying you've recovered, now you can go back out. And to pay for all this, the Italians had a tax on people of above a certain income level.
So am I wrong in thinking that in 1631 the Italians might have actually contained the spread of their disease from endemic to, from a regional point of view, so it didn't reach Britain?
Well, in that particular instance, it didn't, but it was all over Europe at this point. What the Florentine government was doing is just protecting the Florentines. And that's one of the problems. Diseases don't recognize boundaries. It's just like,
So it spread.
Yeah. If Utah closes down and Texas opens up and people go back and forth, the disease moves.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So what they're learning across the 1560s and 70s is that they need a system that expects all the jurisdictions to react in the same way. So what we're going to do in 1578, they're going to routinize the plague operations. So the plague breaks out. Here's the playbook. So
I'm sorry, but I just remember this whole discussion about, hey, there's a manual somewhere in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, well, you need them. And so they issued these things, and then they would write to the various governmental units and say, you haven't been following the rules. This is what you're supposed to do in time of plague. One of my favorite things they were supposed to do is to shut up the anti-vaxxers. Because there were people, of course, who said that, well, if I get the plague, it is God's will, so why should I observe any of these quarantine precautions?
Submission.
Yeah. So they said the bishop's job was to find anybody who claimed that God didn't want you to resist the plague and shut them up. So they didn't have any vaccinations, but they certainly had people who were saying this is
God's
the
will.
causation is different, it is God's will. And if you said that from the pulpit, the bishop would come down and say, you're done as a preacher. Because we as a community have to do this together. Because we've got to isolate. If it's God, if it's the air, we don't care, but we know that we can manage the situation through the keeping people apart.
Fascinating.
So that's the kind of the short version. So they go panic mode, rush around, do all sorts of things. Then they spend some time figuring it out and organizing it, and then they develop a routine because the disease is with them all the time. So the routine is now you know what to do if you need to do it.
So panic, organize, routine.
And turn it into a routine. Yeah.
Again, it feels a little bit like you're saying that history has maybe something to teach us.
Yeah.
It's just, it is, the echoes are so, okay, if you had asked me what would the true similarities be between the 1600s and today, I don't think I would have said there would be many. Medicine is advanced, and we are advanced, and you just described what we've been through.
Yeah. Of course, the difference now is that we were able to very rapidly figure out a vaccine.
Correct.
Which they never did for this, not until the 20th century. But yes, our tools are weak, our understanding is weak, and the way we respond is still this panic, figure it out, build the routine. One of the reasons I think we study history is so that we don't have to go through the panic phase with quite so much panic. You can lessen the angst by knowing people have been here before. And
we're going to be here again.
That's
because disease doesn't just end.
No, disease does not just end. And in the case of the Black Death, it is still with us. It's with us here in the rodents around us in Logan, Utah. The difference is, of course, we don't live with them. We're not getting their fleas.
Yeah.
Because we've changed a few things on that level. But
so when you study the time period and then live in this time period, and you think about the role of medicine, the role of cultural institutions, other organizations, nonprofits, NGOs, churches, governments, and then we have the striation of governments.
Mm-hmm.
And in the United States, we have this broad span of 50 different states, and then in those spans, we have school districts.
Yep.
And we have, water conservancy districts. And, we're an advanced society, and we're going to get hit in 2020. We're going to get hit at another future time. How does history teach us to prepare?
Well, yeah, history teaches us several lessons that we apparently haven't yet learned. One of the things about dealing with a disease is that you can't have multiple jurisdictions contradicting each other.
And when you say that, we're talking about a nation that's somewhat divided, if not incredibly divided.
Mhm.
We've seen
Yeah.
that recently in a couple of elections.
Yeah, but the Italians figured out in the 16th century that you needed a health department, right? Because when these things happen, somebody has to organize the response.
Do you think the Brits have come there with the National Health Service?
Well, I think that they have much more efficiently than most of the world, because their National Health Service they have led the world in getting the vaccinations out there, but of course their first responses were just like ours. Close everything, wipe everything. And now we're coming to the point where we understand that we did many things in the beginning that weren't necessary because we really didn't understand what the disease was.
The Elizabethans were thinking this might be 2, 3, 4, 5 years. What were they thinking in terms of time frames?
They probably knew that because there were seasonal effects of the plague. So if it breaks out in a summer, it runs until it begins to drop off in the following spring.
They're hoping for a single season,
Hoping
year.
for a single season, and quite often it worked that way, but then it might come back in 2 years or 3 years. So they're kind of 1563 there's an outbreak, 1568 there's an outbreak, 1572 there's an outbreak, 1578, 1582. It's not predictable, but we've followed all the graphs, right? Every TV station has been showing us graphs, and we're all debating about what's the level today. Has it dropped? Has it plateaued? They were doing exactly the same thing, and they were doing it on a very micro level because it was done church by church, parish by parish.
So speaking of a news station, if we were sitting here on a we were interviewing you on a news station as our expert, which you are, what would you share? I mean, we bring in all kinds of experts, right, to our political shows. What would you bring in as your, what would you share given the mic?
Help us make decisions here.
Well, I think I would tell you to panic carefully. One of the things that we learn is that we're always willing to run to the corner and scream. This is the old fire in a crowded theater thing, right?
Don't do that.
And our media has been full of people who've been screaming. And the more screaming you get, the more panic you get, the poorer the decisions become. And then you politicize the panic. And so one of the lessons of history is that rather than think this is all new and we have to run around like chickens with our heads cut off, we need to think about what has been done before and how this is managed.
It sounds to me like what I'm hearing you say is here in 2021, going forward now to the future, we need to expect that this will happen. We need to have people that know how to respond and know how to manage that, and then be a voice and a direction.
That's what Lord Burleigh would say, because
he was trying to be that.
He was trying to be that, and he was doing proper statistical investigation. He was using the best scientists he had, but he was also using the common sense of, well, this is what we've learned just by watching what happens.
So I think we do have that a little bit. We have the top, expert in whichever state, all 50 states or across the country, many countries. But that voice gets out for a time, and then people move
and people
beyond that voice.
And the voice saying the same thing gets boring. You want something that says something new and exciting.
And that probably happened back in Elizabethan times.
That's right. I mean, one of our Aggies is coordinating the whole COVID response in all the research institutions in the Boston area. And from the very beginning, and he let me sit in on some of what the discussions they were having. From the very beginning, they knew what caused the disease. They were talking about RNA from the very beginning. But of course, in between, you have all the screaming pundits and the politicians. And so what they were doing, they knew what they were doing, but who's listening to them?
So we have a few things to learn. I want to kick it to our audience and just say if there are any questions. We have a little bit of time, and I know that there are. We could keep you busy with our questions, but let's just see if there are any questions.
Yeah. We're all trying to read the TV screen that's halfway across the room here.
And I promised that my eyes were good enough, and I'm just not certain that they are, so I'm going to move in just a little tiny bit. So it sounds like Catholicism, being a centralized authority, yielded more success in Italy than in other parts of Europe.
That's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it fair to say that Protestant factions across Europe negatively impacted the spread of the plague? Is the Protestant impact comparable to churches in the U.S. Filing lawsuits to reopen their congregation? I just would like a moment to say I did really well.
That's a great question coming from someone I must have trained really well.
Yes, excellent.
Because actually one of the pieces of the argument that I'm making in the article is what you see, because up until, of course, 1559, they're Catholic. So 1563, Protestants are in control of the government. Now, Protestants have a different conception of the way salvation works. So it's much more you and God rather than us and God. And that first response was to call in the church, but later they stopped calling in the church. And I think this has to do with the way the Protestant assumed that God wasn't going to just squash society to get at a few sinners, because he had already elected the ones he was going to squash. So I think there is an ideological element to how you perceive the role of the individual in the disease, and are we all provoking God? Is one person provoking God? Does
It's
God
just
care?
him. It's
just him.
You pointed at me last time.
That's right. But so I think that there may be a case to be made that says that the Catholic idea about community and salvation might have a better impact than the Protestant individualism.
That's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And we have another good question. Did the people in England at the time scream or voice about their civil liberties in response to the plague mitigation measures?
Well, they had no civil liberties.
I was going to say, we've advanced a long ways.
We have. This is actually
rights-based society.
A good question. I attended a Zoom lecture in the Inns of Court, one of the great law schools in England, and this same thing came up, and it was driving the poor historians nuts, because people kept asking this constitutional question, and the historians are saying, you have no right to do this. I was taught at Cambridge years and years ago is the liberty is the thing that the king decides to give you. And so people, of course, resisted.
Yeah.
Because people are people, and you can't tell me what to do, and I think that's just a normal human response.
Well, and you think about being what you described in a home, where either you're sick and you know that you're going to get all the people you love sick. You can't get food, you can't get fuel. I mean, those. Yeah,
there were lots of people breaking the rules, but they wouldn't have put it in terms of I have a right, because the rights are a totally alien concept.
Comes later. Yeah.
So it seems it is just far enough that I can't skim it very well. It seems that individualism has been an obstacle for cooperation when it comes to the response to COVID. So we're kind of dancing around the same idea again. So individual in the U.S., is there much information about how ordinary people cooperated with the coordinated efforts? And I think, again, we're sort of getting to that same question. And it's an interesting historical question, right? About then and now, and what resistance looked like, and what resistance looks like now, and how it's making us sick or well, or...
That's right. I mean, our understanding of ourselves and our relationship to everything else is deeply affecting the way we're going to respond to the crisis. And so I don't know who asked that question, but Isaiah Jones is maybe on this call, and Isaiah's thesis talks about some of these people, including a guy with the name of Thomas Smith, who concluded that he was the only good person on earth, and so he baptized himself. So when you have that kind of radical, I'm the only one who knows anything about me, you're going to get people who aren't going to cooperate well. On the other hand, if you're afraid, cooperation may be a very rational response, because it's, the people in charge seem to know what they're doing.
We sure hope.
Oh, yeah, we do hope. Okay, I'm having a hard time with this one. How can or do historians play a role in informing responses to public issues and crises such as these?
I had that question the other day with you.
Yeah.
How come you're not on national TV talking about all of this?
Well, if you want the really cynical answer, I don't know the right people. But there are historians. I mean, the American Historical Association is very much engaged in this conversation. And they bring in historians to brief Congress and do things like that, because historians' job is to remember the past patterns and to help us see ourselves inside of those patterns. So if we've got a crisis like this, it's really good to talk to people who can say, well, look, this is the way you think and this is the way you respond. It's harder with a thing like the disease than it is with, say, issues around Black Lives Matter, because there you opened up a conversation about the history of race in the United States, and of course you need historians. This thing wasn't invented yesterday, and it isn't going to disappear tomorrow, so we need to be informed about the deep realities of the past, because our ability to imagine the future is deeply affected by the way we understand the past. The way we understand the past informs the possibilities that we can imagine.
You're making a case for general education.
I am.
You're making a case for the humanities, and you're making a case for teaching history in a way that enlightens that student, whether they're advanced or starting out.
Yep.
So that they, when they become leaders, when they become CEOs, when they become engineers, they have this human perspective that is forward-thinking with an understanding of the past.
Yeah, it's hard to think forward if you don't understand the past.
It is.
And we don't want to repeat all the mistakes of the past.
We'd rather not. But, if as a teacher, if I achieved anything, it was that you people who took my classes saw that there was some relevance to what we did in history class, to what you were doing in your daily lives.
I believe that you mentioned something about that just as we were standing here getting ready for this evening, that getting an A in your class did more than just getting an A in that particular history class. It keyed you up. It was part of your entrance into what we call college.
Yeah, to begin to think in a different way. I think the quote I use, and so some of my survivors out there will remember this, is that in 104 I used to say, if the survivors of this class are always happy.
I was.
Because, of course, what I was really saying is it's like your first class you've taken in college, and it's a hard class, and if you can do this, you can do all the rest.
It's a good mode to live by.
But it's all about giving you perspective. I've had people come back 20 years later and say, you tried to explain this to me, and I never understood it, but now I'm trying to explain it to my 7th grader, and now I understand why you were trying to.
You get context, right?
Yeah.
We have a couple more questions here. It's hard for me to imagine implementing a disease response strategy without cell phones and the internet. Did the authorities in the medieval period have efficient means of communicating plague management mandates in an efficient manner? And I mean, I think one thing we're talking about fewer people, right? But
we're talking about fewer people who were forced to go to church. It was illegal not to go to church. And so you've got a network of churches across the whole country. I guess in Utah we can say it's like wards, right? So because they're by and large, everybody in the community will be seen on a regular basis by people who are prepared to deliver the message.
Deliver a message, and that was what a preacher would do, would be to
That's
deliver
right, and
a
they
message.
very well might read from the pulpit. Here's the order.
Hey, we've been forced to attend.
And
Zoom, WebEx, go to
right.
meeting,
That's right.
But that goes back
Ring Central.
also to what you were saying about management, where you were saying if that person from the pulpit was giving the wrong message,
Yeah,
that was also part of what had to be managed.
exactly. That's right. So you've got to make sure that the preachers are all on text. And the other thing they would do, they read it out in the market. But in an oral society, people are used to hearing and remembering.
I am fascinated by this. So, Lord Burleigh, developed that management skill set. Maybe people look back and said, this is what we learned from him, 50 years, 100 years, 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a time, that 2020, 2021, which we should study intensely. Sociologists, anthropologists, historians, political scientists, economists, anybody, we should be studying this time.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to get their PhDs on 2020, 2021.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, young people are going to come out of wherever,
Mhm.
Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, etc., Utah State, and say, I did my PhD or my master's thesis on this time period.
Yeah. Well,
What will that be teaching the leaders and all of us 10 years from now? What did the lesson
Well,
indicate?
historians do not prophesy. So,
But they teach from
but they give
Critical
people
analysis.
they give people perspective.
And we actually have a couple of questions that are kind of tied to that, and I know we're short on time at this point, but some concern about some of the high school, middle school curriculum and teachers who are history teachers who are not preparing their kids adequately in the perspective of there are a couple of different questions around that concept. What can we do to help improve that?
these kids are studying it firsthand.
Well, one of the things we can do, and this is, it is happening, but it is happening too slowly, in part because of the managerial structures we have. Remember, our school systems were built in 1910, basically. And you have state mandated curricula, and then you have testing.
Are you introducing history again here?
Yeah, that's right.
We need to remember the 1900s.
We do. I mean, the whole university, everything we do here is 1910. So one of the things is that history teaching has changed enormously, but of course it changes slowly, and it depends on who's teaching it, when they were trained, what permission they have from the administration, how the state mandates the tests. If the test demands to know who sailed the ocean blue in 1492, that's what you teach. Yeah. You don't necessarily teach the student to think critically about how societies solve problems. And so it's a problem that will probably never be resolved, except that we have to pay a lot of attention to how we train teachers. And maybe we should all get on the school board and say we don't have to teach this old curriculum anymore.
Well, as we sort of come to a close, I want to say thank you for being such a remarkable teacher, for preparing so many Aggies, for helping the people who you taught to be that remarkable group of people who can be part of that voice. And we talk in the Alumni Association a lot about the Aggie family, and it's clear from the number of people who are here with us this evening and from the response that, thanks for all you've done and keep doing and keep keeping us honest.
It's a tremendous pleasure. They gave me a list of everybody who'd signed up.
Yeah.
That's humbling in itself.
It is.
But what I love about this list is just looking down it and how many memories it brings back.
Yeah.
Some of you go back to the early 80s, some of you go back to last week. But it's wonderful to have all of you back in the classroom again.
Yeah. We're
it's just
signing-
great
We're
fun.
signing up for more Dr. Jones here.
So anytime you want my opinions on anything, I can give you an informed, researched answer.
You
That's-
can count on the fact that we want you back.
Thank
So
you.
thank you. And thanks again to the alumni group for having us and for all of you for joining us. It's been a lovely evening. And Nate, thanks for joining me.
Oh, fun.
It's always good to have a lawyer cross-examine you. know.
They closed down the courts again this year. You know that.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.